welcome to the Metal Book Tavern, where we talk about books and metal music. I noticed recently that the vast majority of books that I own were originally written in English, even though most of them are translated into Russian. But I also happen to have books in other languages as well. In this video, I'm going to go through all the books that I own that originally aren't written in English. I have a general rule that if the book originally is not in English, I read in Russian, with a few exceptions. And this exception is going to appear in the video. So the first language in this video is Spanish, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I read this book in 2014. I found this book in the library. I picked this up mostly because it was one of the few books that was modern. I mean, it was this edition. It looks so good. Quite a lot of books in the library were old Soviet editions, and I'm not a fan of Soviet editions. It's one of my favorite books. At first I didn't feel alright while reading this because I thought it was kinda depressing, but now it's one of my favorites and I'd love to read it again. Next language is Italian. I own two books that were originally in Italian. First book is The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. I read this when I was in my third year of university. I remember that we studied some principles of Machiavelli and I thought that it would be a relevant read. I even did a presentation on this book. I remember that there was one chapter that resembled the Red Wedding from A Song of Ice and Fire. The second one is The Divine Comedy by Dante. I have not read this yet. I have this little green sticker attached, if you can see it. It means that it's a book that I have yet to read. I heard a lot about this book. I even know that there are a few Iced Earth songs based on The Divine Comedy, but that's not the reason I got the book. I heard about this book long ago, and in general I'm no Iced Earth fan. I wanted to own this for years and finally I got it last autumn. I am not planning to read this yet. Maybe next year. Next language is Greek. There are 5 books. 4 of those are philosophy books. The very first book is The State by Plato. I haven't finished this. There's this orange sticker attached. It means that I started this book and I have to continue reading it. It's a dialogue on how society is ought to be. I stopped at the page 170. It's an interesting dialogue. I'm not in the mood for philosophy right now. I will continue this at some point. Speaking of philosophy, I have a video on my old channel named Book Recommendations for International Relations Students, where I recommend books for them, both non-fiction and fiction. Go check that out. Next I have Politics by Aristotle. Here this blue sticker attached. It means that I started reading this, did not finish. Now I have to start it over again. It's kind of a complex read for me. And back in 2018 when I began reading this, it was hard for me to read. Maybe this time it's going to be different. More Aristotle. Here are Ethics and Metaphysics. I think Ethics had a different title, but I don't remember what it was. It started with N, that's how I remember, but I can't pronounce it. Here's the orange sticker. It means that I have to finish this book. And this one has a green sticker. It means that I haven't read this book. And finally we have the book that has been on my bookshelves since 2020. The Iliad by Homer. I bought this book in 2020. I read a few pages and then I was like, not today, Iliad, not today. Your time will come. You know what? Now in front of you I'm going through a few pages and maybe I will be ready to read this book in the nearby future. I don't know. Next language is Chinese and I have one book. The Art of War by Sun Tzu. It's not a very big book. There are only 100-something pages, and then there's some commentary. I remember when we went through this book in my university and I wanted to read this, and I literally forced my friend to give this book for me for New Year's. I also remember that I sat down, read this book and listened to Sabaton's The Art of War. Not the whole album, but the song of the same name. The song actually does a pretty good job explaining the whole essence of the book. It doesn't cover the full book, but it explains a lot. Next language is French, and I have one book. The Iron King by Maurice Druon. This is the first part of the Accursed King series. On my channel I have a video about 7 genres that I don't read, and historical fiction is one of them. If I want to dive into history, I'd read historical non-fiction or read the lyrics to Sabaton songs, but nonetheless the Accursed Kings, they caught me. I like the annotation, and maybe I also like the Russian editions. Not this one. I would love to get Accursed Kings someday and read all of the series. There are 7 books in the series. I saw that George R.R. Martin was fond of these books. He said that they were sort of an inspiration for A Song of Ice and Fire. Next language is Russian, and there are 3 books. So this book is 12 Chairs by Petrov and Ilf. There's the blue sticker. It means that I remember nothing from what I've read so far and I need to start over again. I bought this book in 2017 and it was kinda hard for me to read for some reason. Okay, so the next book is Mikhail Bulgakov, Diary of a Young Doctor. I think the English-speaking audience knows the show with Daniel Radcliffe as the main character. That show is based on this book. This book contains a few short stories of a doctor who got to be a doctor in the village. I did not finish this book. Here's the blue sticker saying so. And I need to start over. But I do remember a few good interesting moments. And the last book is the book that I enjoyed very much in school. And that's Fathers and Children by Ivan Turgenev. For some reason translated into English as Fathers and Sons. I read this book in school, at least partly, and I remember that I liked it very much. And then I decided to read it again as an adult. I read this in 2017 and I liked it and I want to read it again. Next language is Danish, and I have one book. Hans Christian Andersen's Best Fairy Tales. I have this 1-hour vlog where I read 9 Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales. It's the longest video I have done so far. You know what I didn't mention in the vlog, that this vlog for some reason felt like I'm making an album. I really don't know why. This is such an association. In case you haven't watched my vlog, a secret fairy tale turned out to be very long. It all kind of reminded me of writing my own novel, because the last chapter of my novel is very long. It's the longest chapter in the book. If you're curious about my book, the link is in the description. Follow the link tree and then there is the link to my debut novel on Amazon Kindle. I finally changed the cover of the book and now it looks very good. You know what, when I think of Hans Christian Andersen, I always think of The Ugly Duckling first. I think The Ugly Duckling is his best story. Also I like The Snow Queen, Thumbelina and The Little Match Girl. If you want to know more what I say about Hans Christian Andersen, just watch the 1-hour vlog. The next language is Swedish and I have 2 books. Both are by the same author, Fredrik Backman. So this is Anxious People, and this one has a long title. It's about the grandma says she's sorry. The title is longer, but I don't remember how to say it in English. I like both of these books a lot. I even gifted Anxious People to my friend for her birthday. After I gifted her Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, I decided that she needed something lighter and I gifted her this book. I think if you ask me to name the true 21st century book, I'd name Anxious People. It's very, very modern. It follows a lot of modern trends. If you read the book, you would understand what I mean, that it's so modern. The thing I don't like about this novel is that I felt that Bachman kept kinda nurturing me about life from the very first pages. Life this, life that, we try to impress others, blah blah blah. He starts preaching about life. I didn't like it. But that didn't stop me, and I'm glad it didn't. This book is fun in many ways. This one, on the other hand, I liked much more. I think it's more deeper and more complex, but it's still a fun book. But this book has a lot of funny moments as well. I wanna change the cover because I don't like that it's a soft cover. I like this cover very much. The next language is Polish, and I have 6 books. I will show you just one, The Witcher by Andrzej Sapkowski. Yes, in Polish I only have the first 6 The Witcher books. I need to buy the 7th one, The Lady of the Lake. So far I read only the first 5 Witcher books. I don't know when I'm going to continue. I have been reading this series since 2018. I have been reading these books for 4 years. I haven't even finished buying. I need to finish that. Yeah, I know that the Witcher series also has some spin-offs, sequels, blah blah blah, but I'm not interested. I'm only interested in the main series. It starts with The Last Wish and ends with The Lady of the Lake, for me at least. You know what? As time went on, I really grew to appreciate the first 2 books in the series. I know that in the Western countries, Blood of the Elves is considered the first book, but in Russia they started with the very first one, The Last Wish, and then continued with The Sword of Destiny. So for me, the first book isn't Blood of the Elves, that's the third one. The Last Wish is the first one. Back in the day, back in 2018, when I first started reading The Witcher, I really wanted it to be like a Song of Ice and Fire. I wanted some intrigues, I wanted some global drama. Nowadays, I appreciate the simplicity of the first 2 books. The first 2 books follow The Witcher and sometimes his friend, the Bard, and Yennefer, and it's simply just hunting down monsters for money, nothing more. But then Ciri appears at the end of the second one, and then starts Blood of the Elves, and it turns into something global. The simplicity of the first 2 books is underrated. I also have one book in Norwegian. I decided to keep it a secret. I won't show it on the camera, but I can tell you that it's a short graphic novel. It's non-fiction, it's sort of a history. That's all I can say. Now, the last language. You know what? When I counted the books, I realized that if you take all the English books away from my bookshelves, this is the language that's going to dominate my bookshelves. The language is German. Alright, so the first book I want to show here is Faust by Johann Wolfgang Goethe. It's hard for me to pronounce that name. You know, I look at this book and I remember 2020 when I read the book. It was January. Good times. Here's one thing. I liked Faust a lot. It's a great epic poem and it's much easier to read than Paradise Lost. Even if I read Paradise Lost in Russian, Faust would still be easier. Faust is written in 2 parts. The first part isn't very big, but the second one is very big. I liked the first part very much, but the second one I did not enjoy that much. I thought it was kind of bizarre. I don't know, maybe when I read this book again I will change my mind, but so far I think that the first part is spectacular, but the second part is too weird. I really hope that one day my knowledge of German will be high enough to read Faust in original language, just like I read Paradise Lost in English. I didn't want to read Paradise Lost in English, to be honest. I wanted to get it in Russian, but I got it in English instead. And when I found the Russian version, after reading the English one, I didn't want to read it in Russian. Now we have two philosophy books. First is Thus sprach Zarathustra by Thus spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. For some reason it's very hard for me to say the title of this book in English. I read this 2 times. First time I didn't understand much, I didn't remember anything special, but the second one had some interesting points. And the second one is A Criticism of Pure Reason by Immanuel Kant. I regret that I did not find this book in English. I regret that I did not find this book when I was still at university, when I was studying this. I remember that we had this and I was actually looking for this book, but I didn't find it. Now I did, after university. Now I'm not into philosophy that much anymore, but for a while. One day I'm going to go back. And I'm reading this book very slowly, because it's kinda complex for me. Maybe one day it will be easier for me to read this and understand it, what's most important. Next comes this very small book that is actually in German. I bought this when I was actually learning the language and it was very cheap. This is Der Zwergenese by Wilhelm Hauff. I think it translates as The Dwarf Knows. Okay, next book. Short stories in German by Ollie Richards and Alex Rawlings. Okay, so technically this book is in English because it has written the short stories in German, but since the stories are in German for German learners, it's the 90% of the book, I consider this to be a book in German. I remember that I managed to read the very first story and understand almost everything without the translator. This book is very good for A2, B1 learners. I really hope that one day, when I will rewatch the How I Did Not Learn German video, I will be laughing because I'll be fluent in the language and I just laugh at my past self. And so here's another book. This is 400 Jokes in German by Ilya Frank. In this book you have 400 jokes, and these jokes are written in German twice, but the first time there's also the Russian translation following. In short, you read this in German, then in Russian, in German, then in Russian, and then fully in German. I took a picture of a few jokes from this book and posted it on my Instagram page. You can check that out there. Now comes one of the best books of the year, The Never-Ending Story by Michael Ende. I wanted to read this book for quite a long time and finally I did this spring. It's definitely one of the best books I read not only this year, but in general. I have a video on my channel named Why It's Worth Reading, The Never-Ending Story. I talk more about this book and if you're curious, go check that out. Okay, I forgot to mention that these 3 are sort of, cheating or something, because this is more for German learning, but still. And finally, I have 4 Hermann Hesse books. Hermann Hesse is the second author after J.R.R. Tolkien, whose books I collect. Here are the 3 unread books. Here's The Last Summer of Klingzor, or how it's called, I don't remember. Allow me to read this in German. It's Klingzors letzter Sommer. Yes, The Last Summer of Klingzor. This is Damien. I heard a lot about this book. Quite a lot of people on Russian booktube read this. I read the annotation, it sounds very interesting. And finally, Gertrude. And the last book that has been on my mind, I read it in one night, loved it a lot, I keep thinking about it over and over again. and I'd love to read it very soon. That's Beneath the Wheel. Just like with The Neverending Story, I have a video on my channel why it's worth reading, Beneath the Wheel. I talk about this book, I say why it's interesting to read, I say what I liked about it, but there is one thing that I did not mention in that video, and I'd like to mention it here, about the main character, Hans Gibbernath. He should have been more stoic towards people who offered him to study during summer. Okay, I understand that everyone was like, you have to study, you have to study, you have to enter this academy or gymnasium or whatever it was called. And he did, he was obedient. But then came summer, and he was simply offered to study during summer, and he accepted it. You should have said no, even if the whole town brainwashed him into studying. I just look at this book and I remember my own years of studying, and no one could force me to study when I wasn't obliged to. I did that only once, and it didn't last long. Anyway, this is a very good book. I recommend reading this one a lot. If I didn't read Beneath the Wheel, The Neverending Story would have been my book of the year, along with Wheel of Time series, but I think of this one all the time, and it's one of the best books I read. Alright, that's all. These are all the books that aren't originally in English. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. What are the non-English books that you have, even if they are translated? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Goodbye.